Good morning and welcome to today's panel discussion on immuno-oncology partnering. And it's important to bring it at this stage. We have a very distinguished panel, and together with my co-chair, Matthias Müllenbeck, we look forward very much to the discussion over the next 45 minutes. We will start with general introductions, and I will begin by saying I am Esteban Pombo. I am the Chief Technology Officer of TargImmune Therapeutics based in Basel, Switzerland. Matthias is our co-chair. Please, Matthias.
Absolutely. So great pleasure to be here. Thanks for the intro, Esteban. So my name is Matthias Müllenbeck. I'm heading Global Business Development and Alliance Management at Merck Healthcare, KGaA, Darmstadt, Germany. So as a quick intro, Merck KGaA is a company that's really active in 3 areas: healthcare, life science, and electronics. We're currently on a relatively steep growth path. So our ambition here is to grow the company by 2025 to a 25 billion revenue. We've communicated that also via our capital markets days that we want to achieve this really by a combination of organic and inorganic growth initiatives. In healthcare specifically, we are looking to drive growth out of 4 franchises. So this is an immuno-oncology franchise, a neurology and immunology franchise, a fertility franchise, and a cardiovascular, metabolic, and endocrinology franchise. We're super open to talk about partnering proposals across all of these franchises, not only for R&D specific deals, but especially also for, let's say, more late-stage clinical and or commercial stage deals that help us to achieve our hashtag 25 by 25 vision. So really looking forward to the panel discussion today.
Thank you, Matthias. Khatereh?
Hi, everyone. My name is Katja Ahmadi, and I work at MSD within the global BD&L organization. And my specific role is that I head the search and evaluation team, business development team for Europe and Middle East. I've been with MSD for around 6 years and have had a focus in oncology business development. MSD is a global pharmaceutical company and operates as Merck & Co. in North America. We have 4 business units: pharmaceuticals, biologics, vaccines, and animal health. In terms of therapeutic areas, we're pretty broad. Our main areas of focus are neuro-oncology, of course, is a great pillar of growth for us. Cardiovascular, metabolic diseases, infectious disease and vaccines, as well as fibrotic diseases, respiratory, and certain ophthalmology indications. Our foundational programs in oncology are, of course, Keytruda, and through our JVs with AZ and Eisai, Lynparza, and Lenvima. Thank you. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Khatereh. Aram?
Thank you, Esteban. So my name is Aman Mangasarian. I'm the CEO of NOXXON Pharma, which is a Berlin-based company active in the cancer space. We focus on the tumor microenvironment, in particular with the drugs that target chemokines. Our lead drug is NOX812, and we're developing that in 2 solid tumors, pancreas cancer. We'll be going into a second-line setting in collaboration actually with MSD scientifically, and glioblastoma. We're currently going through a dose escalation combining with radiotherapy and getting some quite interesting data that we published at the Society for Neuro-Oncology late last year. So all of our drugs are developed in combination, and that's one of the challenges that we have before us, is to figure out how best to do that. And so very interested to hear everyone and have this discussion with other panel members today.
Great, Aram. Thanks very much. Daniel?
Hi, so I'm Daniel Teper. I'm the founder and CEO of Cytovia Therapeutics. We're based in the US. Actually, headquarters of the companies are in Miami, Florida. We have R&D in Boston. We have GMP manufacturing of cells, because we're a cell therapy company in Puerto Rico. We're about to open in Europe in 2022, and we have a joint venture in China. So we're a young company, less than 3 years old, but already global. Our focus is on natural killer cells. We believe we're the first company to have both NK cells derived from induced pluripotent stem cells, iPSCs, as well as NK engager antibodies. And we have demonstrated and believe that there's a strong future in combination of cells with antibodies and particularly immune cell engager antibodies. We are getting into the clinic in the end of 2022 with a leading indication, which is hepatocellular carcinoma with a very significant unmet medical need.
Thanks very much, Daniel. Michael.
Yeah, so Michael Cozart, I'm a managing partner at LifeSci Consulting. LifeSci Consulting has kind of two business focuses. So on one side of the business, it's a strategy consulting firm doing indication triages, commercial opportunity assessments, due diligence assessments, valuations, et cetera. And on the other side of the business, which is perhaps more pertinent to today's call, and which people like Matthias and Khatereh know our firm best, perhaps, is we work as an external business development consultant. So primarily working on the sell side, helping small biotechs do strategic transactions, whatever they may be, whether that's licensing, R&D, or M&A, with companies like MSD and like Merck. And so over the course of my 15 years in industry, I've done well over 40 deals totaling over $5 billion in total deal value. So it's certainly wonderful to be on the panel today.
Great. Michael, thanks very much. As you see, we have a very broad series of experience here, and it's quite useful to see for the topics that we want to discuss today, which are some probably new drivers of the deal making in the field. Some of these have been on for a long period of time, but they become more and more acute. One very important one is the impending and patent expiry of some of the key players in the field. We know the Keytruda will expire in the middle of 2028, and that generates certain interest in the field, opportunities, and also challenges. But there's also many other drivers, such as the access to capital, the pricing discussions in the US, and overall market opportunities. So these are certainly not new, but they may be affecting the deal making in immuno-oncology in a new way. And this is what we want to explore during this panel discussion. So as we go through the topics I mentioned, the key patents that cover the checkpoint inhibitors, both CTLA-4 and PD-1 and PD-L1 antibodies, are in the process of expiring and really offering an opportunity for generic competition, but also offering really a challenge for companies to maintain their revenues and build on their very important franchise and the service that they have been providing to patients, bringing really very extraordinary benefits to patients that have been receiving these therapies. And so, how do companies approach this as a challenge and an opportunity? I'd like to give the word first to Khatereh to see what, from her company's perspective, what is the view and how do we move from here? Yeah, Khatereh.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll speak more broadly about MSD, our position on the impending LOEs. So despite these, which go beyond actually Keytruda for our oncology portfolio, I want to highlight some of the optionality that we consider we have that gives us the potential to still keep ahead of the field in oncology. So this includes leveraging, of course, our leadership that we've built in this area, deploying our cash flow, which is strong, to business development. Business development is going to be key for us, deal making, and we do have a broad pipeline in oncology, actually covering more than 20 novel mechanisms of action. which we of course continue to advance. So I'll go into some specific points and some of these in more detail. So for Keytruda, we have very much focused on earlier lines and maintenance dosing. And this will ultimately trigger the need for innovation, for example, around route of administration, formulation, and dosing. Combinations with multiple other agents, including IO agents such as cytokines, other checkpoints, bispecific immune engagers, with combinations with Pembro, we think reset the IO standard of care for 2025 to 28 and beyond that in many important cancer type settings such as lung, CRC, melanoma, renal, etc. And then, you know, we have also a focus on the non-IO mechanisms of actions. For example, we were pioneers in the championing the role of Pembro plus chemo, and of course ADCs, if you like, are the next generation chemotherapy where we have a strong focus. And then beyond that, we have belzutifan at the RAS-MEK pathway, BTK pathway, you know, other mechanisms of actions where we have we're building in our portfolio. So in terms of BD, we expect 2022 and beyond to be very active years coming up in terms of BD. And we expect a variety of different types of deals, being open to both, you know, large or mid-sized deals, as well as this earlier stage deals, which are really also, you know, our bread and butter for keeping the innovation in our pipeline, the driving engine of our future pipeline, and our foundational therapies, Keytruda, Lenvima, and Lynparza, that really support combinations with many other treatments, potentially bolstering longevity beyond the respective LOEs, which are pending for these three. We also have a large number of clinical trials with outside assets that are currently operating in R&D only collaborations with either of those three foundational therapies that really that we're expecting readouts in the coming years, 2023 to 2025 timeframe. And then, of course, I talked about IO combos as well. We have TIGIT, ALT4, and LAG3, again reading out in that time frame around 23 to 25. We feel there's enormous advancement in early stage settings for Keytruda, and it's going to be very important because also, you know, in terms of thinking beyond the LOE, because that will bring in terms of the what I was talking about in terms of novel formulations and ways of dosing Keytruda. And we're confident we can provide that, bring that innovation to the table to bring, you know, protection beyond the pending LOE. Maybe I should just stop there and see if there's any questions, or if you want to if anyone else wants to comment.
Great, Khatereh, thanks very much. Daniel, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think, you know, we have to remember that, you know, IO drugs and Keytruda are biologics, and that the generic competition is or the biosimilar competition is real, but it's much lower. You know, if my numbers are correct, I think in 2020, the share of biosimilars for, you know, early biologics such as Herceptin, you know, worldwide is about 30%, and in the US it's, you know, still 15-20%. The price pressure is significantly less. So it's not to be discounted, but it's very different than what happened with small molecule, particularly in the US, where drugs like Lipitor, lose 90% of the revenues within a couple of years. I think also the fact that Keytruda is moving to earlier lines of treatment is significant, because on the one hand, that you have potentially lower pricing, but on the other hand, you have a much larger addressable patient population. And lastly, I want to comment about the checkpoint inhibitors coming from China, which obviously in China are priced significantly lower. Most of the time, I think it's about 1/10 of what it is in the US, or even in Europe. And the Beijing checkpoint, which now is going to be commercialized by Novartis outside of China, it'd be interesting to know where it's positioned from a pricing standpoint. I would assume probably at the level of the biosimilars, probably not as an innovative checkpoint. I don't think that, I'm not Novartis, but I don't think that cutting the price 50% would be of benefit of anybody. But I think one has to watch biologics coming from China to the global market.
Thanks, Daniel. I say it's certainly important economic aspects that will drive some of the deal making. Aram, you mentioned that your drugs basically are combination partners. They're good combination partners. How do you see this situation in terms of the generic drugs coming along and or biosimilars coming along, as well as partnering with people who have a really established brands and a large patient population that they're already serving?
Thanks, Esteban. That's a great question. I think we have this scientific collaboration at the R&D level with MSD, which has been great, and it's been they've been an extremely reliable partner and given us good advice on trial design. Of course, we looked at other potential partners, but when you see what's happened to some of the other antibodies that are not yet approved, it certainly gives you, as a small company who's incredibly dependent on your partner, a little bit of pause about trying to link up with someone. We can talk briefly about what happened with Sintilimab, which did all its development in China, and then Eli Lilly tried to bring to the US, and they had a very rough time. Or even a company like Agenus, who for reasons not entirely in their control, thought they were going to have an approval of a PD-1, and it ended up getting delayed pretty considerably. So I think for those reasons, companies like us will probably tend to gravitate more toward the MSDs and the BMSs of the world, who are already there, who are already established, where the manufacturing is rock solid. So I think those are the types of considerations we're looking at as a smaller company when we think about who to partner with. On the combination front, maybe one other comment. Khatereh mentioned that combinations might extend exclusivity. And I think that's, there's a number of ways to look at that. And one of them, for example, is what you see in the anti-infective space is they actually develop fixed combinations, which is an interesting approach, I think. It also, it'll reduce things like error and mixing and that sorts of things in hospitals. So I think there's a lot to be said there, and it's we're developing as we move forward, and we're trying to think about that, and it's really a moving chessboard as we look at what's happening out there right now.
Great, Aram. I think it's clear that there are very significant challenges in bioscience, because making something that is biologically similar enough that still can be manufactured, that still has the same sort of glycosylation pattern, that still has the same biodistribution, and so on and so on. Those are all very, very significant challenges. And so, I fully understand that the landscape moves there. And then maybe I'll just pass on the word to Matthias to introduce the next question.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Esteban. I really just want to go back to Aram for a second with the next question. Let's switch our mind now toward deal making. I think that was a really interesting thought on the fixed dose combinations, for example, as one of the options how we can think about really life cycle management of checkpoint inhibitors. And also coming out of JP Morgan, I think for me at least, it's very clear that yes, 2022 will be a deal-heavy year, and also combination deals, clinical trial supply, collaboration, all these things, especially in oncology, that they are of course here to stay. Yeah, I'm just interested, Aram, hearing from you a little bit. I mean, what are your thoughts on how do you see that your thinking around deal making is evolving beyond your relationship with MSD, as we understood? I mean, how do you think about these next steps? How do you, from a more deal making perspective, prepare yourself to interact maybe with a broader ecosystem, right? Where you have different players in different countries that will be the leading PDX suppliers to stay with that model, for the coming years when you look at the life cycle of your prime compound. What are your thoughts here?
No, for us, it's really the question that consumes us at a strategic level is how do we take a drug that can be combined with PD1, PD-L1 inhibitors, but also things like cell therapy, because effectively the mechanism of action of our lead drug is that it overcomes exclusion of effector cells. And so, one obvious additional place where you can potentially exploit that is combinations with cell therapy. And we don't have a lot of data there, but I mean, if you look at the various approved cell therapies, they're all B-cell malignancies. But multiple myeloma, I think, didn't perform quite as well as some of the other cancers. They don't, for example, they don't see a plateau in the survival curve, and that's an indication where we already have clinical data, where experts were already playing with our drug years ago to say, well, you remodel the bone marrow and make it more hostile for myeloma. So those are the types of things we're thinking about. And then there's more obvious ones about combinations with VEGF inhibitors, which you block angiogenesis as well as vasculogenesis at the same time. But I think it's getting more complex for companies like us with assets like this, because we may need we may be forced to go down the route of fixed combinations if we want to fully exploit these types of assets with PD-1s, with cell therapies, with anti-VEGFs. Because I don't see an easy way to just sell the drug alone and have combinations made in the hospitals, because you'll never figure out who's doing what with your drug and what it's being combined with.
Is it fair, maybe before we go to you, Daniel, to say then and distill it down that you're trying to hedge your risk by diversifying really your combination portfolio? Is that a fair?
Yes, yeah, that's fair. I mean, we need the resources to do it, obviously, and that we'll come to that in the later part of the panel. but for sure that it's part of our approach.
Great, Daniel, you had your hand up.
Sure. So I think a few remarks. The first one is, how many combination can you consider? What's the future of multifunctional, molecules? Clearly the most recent data on bispecific and trispecific is more promising than it's been in the past. So it may be the decade of multifunctional biologic molecules, and beyond monoclonal antibodies, a new generation, because when you are talking about hitting different targets, I think if you have multiple products, it will be very complex from development standpoint, because the regulatory agencies are going to ask the contribution of each component, and it's going to be complicated from a commercial standpoint. The second point that you made, Aram, is with the combination with cells, and obviously cell therapy is at a very early stage. There are a few CAR Ts on the market. They have their benefits, but also their limitation. You have new generation of allogeneic cells with potentially unlimited supply, and with also the potential for gene editing. And one should not forget that when we're talking about TIGIT and PD-1, and you can gene edit the cells in a way where you're addressing those challenges of the tumor microenvironment. And the question is, how much do you edit the cells, or how much do you combine the cells with biologic molecules, either monoclonal antibody or multifunctional? And then lastly, I would say that because of all the challenges in development and commercialization, I think it's very likely that there will be a consolidation of innovative biotech companies. I mean, not only with big pharma acquiring one or several of them, because actually you need several of them to have the puzzle, but with the lower valuations now in the market, maybe people are going to think we're better off combining with one or two other companies that have complementary assets, so that we have all of them and we can have a coherent development plan than trying to do multiple alliances, which it's nice on paper, but it's very difficult to manage.
I do fully agree, and I share your scientific enthusiasm, right, for really seeing cellular therapies, the next generation of them, as kind of micro drug manufacturing plants that react really adaptively to the tumor microenvironment. Still the jury's a little bit out there, right? But who had thought about mRNA vaccine technology being around so quickly, right? So let's really be careful about predictions here. Maybe, Michael, to loop you also into the discussion more from the neutral point, not on the buy side, not on the sell side. I mean, what's your view really on 2022 combinations and how the deal structures may change here moving forward? Maybe even also beyond the pure combination work.
Yeah, for sure. So thanks, Matthias. I mean, being kind of neutral, I mean, what we're seeing when we're doing a lot of valuations in particular, with, I don't know, something like 90 PD-1, PD-L1s, in China, a number of the major pharma companies have their own PD-1, PD-L1s. You have to think about, I mean, for instance, we did an oncolytic virus deal. A lot of the new age OVs can be armed with a number of different, checkpoint inhibitors. And so when you look at, 1 + 1 is 3 in terms of pricing, that is kind of changed when we're looking to model the kind of financials for deals with PD-1s, being commoditized is probably a bit of a strong word, but with the pricing coming down, the margins kind of going up. It's interesting to see the dynamics when you're running NPVs for models and trying to estimate where drugs are going to fit into the treatment paradigm. Obviously that is going to change as well with some of these drugs coming off patent. But when Daniel was talking, what's interesting about the biosimilar space, unlike the small molecule space, I guess the layperson who's not in the industry doesn't always understand that it's biosimilar, similar not being the same, right? And so that's why the pricing hasn't substantially come down, both here in the US, but as well as in Europe, because it's not like a generic Zoloft is the same as Zoloft, right? So what we're seeing a big shift in is how we're doing a lot of modeling, in particular for combination therapies, where it's, I don't know, an oncolytic virus plus a PD-1 or some other therapies that have a PD-1 component, trying to estimate what is that going to look like, when a drug launches in 6 to 7 years. So, as we all know, valuation's a bit more of a art than a science, but it is it is interesting to see how that's changed even over the course of the past 3 years with these kind of impending patent cliffs.
Very interesting. Just one more question of curiosity. I mean, how do you see them from your analytics perspective? These, I want to almost say, guerrilla pricing strategies. Yeah, that, for example, Lilly went down with their PDX. How do you value that in that market environment?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And so what we've been doing more and more of is talking to payers for companies much earlier in kind of development. So we'll do pricing and market access studies for companies in preclinical development. Primarily that's driven by, Matthias, companies like Merck, MSD, have asked us that in negotiations. And what's really interesting is I heard from another major pharma that when they're doing deals, some of the milestone payments are not necessarily triggered solely by you get approval or you don't get approval. It's you get approval and what level are you reimbursed at? So if you get reimbursed at X level, your terms are this. If you get reimbursed at Y level, your terms are this. So that is a massive shift from what we've done historically, and quite frankly, trying to model that is a bit of a nightmare. But that is a really interesting shift in the marketplace when you're looking at valuations where it's driven by yes approval, but it's almost the most important milestone payment is what does your reimbursement look like?
Absolutely. I think we have a fascinating structure from a BD perspective ahead of us there. If you think about outcome-based pricing, how do you want to reflect that in a standardized, way that is also easy to process? I think also we as a global BD community in pharma need to further develop and find the right models there.
100%. Yeah. And the PCSK9s did, in the cardio space, did a good job to provide some groundwork for that, but it is something that we're going to have to solve for going forward. And I can tell you, talking to payers every day, all day effectively, when we're doing commercial opportunity assessments, they are very keenly and acutely aware that is coming to the oncology space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Deal making is one part of the equation. The other equation, of course, the market environment and how we fund these things. Aram was touching already based on it. So maybe Esteban, let's explore that a little bit further.
Yes, thank you, Matthias. I think there's a couple of interesting questions relating to the topic that we just discussed, which basically, if market access is one of the important outcomes, it's very important that the development strategy also takes into account all the required inputs of market access, and that there is sufficient evidence that is obtained in the course of the development to support the market access considerations that have been modeled. And so this, as well as combinations, as well as others, are require capital investment. And capital, there have been sort of certain significant changes over the last few years in the accessibility of capital for biotech companies to move the projects forward. And one aspect was suggested by Daniel, that there have been these Spacks, these special vehicles that have the possibility of collecting multiple technologies under one hat and making this interesting portfolio of technologies, if you wish, as a single company that takes, that's a much stronger company to move assets forward. That's one access to capital route that was not really available several years ago. And it was very exciting quite recently. Still, there are many Spacks out there looking for assets, and it might be a scramble. That may be an aspect. Then there are other avenues where access to capital has increased, and others where it has been actually probably more difficult for sometimes the companies. So if you would like to see, what is your view in terms of access to capital? Aram, you mentioned that clearly if you had all the money that you would like for your development plan in the combination space, the fixed combination and so on, that would certainly drive one strategy. If access to capital is limited, however, you need to focus on some very key strategic elements of basic data needs to be generated to have a minimum evidence for partnering. So I'd like to split this question into access to capital and then required evidence for partnering. So we see both the cell, if you want, and the combination. So let's start with Aram. How
I think Michael. Perhaps Michael seems like he had something he really wanted to say.
I see your hands.
So Esteban, I had a quick commentary on Spacks. So Spacks are interesting. LifeSci has 2 Spacks. So we de-SPACed Vincerix, we de-SPACed Science 37, which is a decentralized clinical trials company. That market is very challenging. So not only are there a number of SPACs looking for assets, what is really interesting is lately, the redemption rate of SPACs is somewhere on the effect of 95%, and they can't raise pipes either. So the SPAC market, I don't want to say is dead. It's getting there very quickly. So that's a vehicle that's become very difficult to leverage capital. And if you look at the performance of SPACs recently, the vast majority of them are way, way down.
Yeah, I think that fits with, I mean, fundamentally, if you think about it, the SPACs aren't that different from some of these fallen angel type companies where the assets failed and they have cash. If there's a lot of cash in the SPAC, there's a ton of competition, right, to get access to that. So these aren't easy vehicles to get access to. I think fundamentally there's a lot of investors with a lot of money still around. They're a bit scared right now, I think, by the turbulence in the markets. So a lot of them are going to be sitting it out. Companies like us have additional issues, being European, being small market cap, and that doesn't facilitate raising money, right? So those are particular to us. But there are solutions, and you can certainly make it through. But I think the key for companies like us is to get to fundamental investors who are interested in the science, as well as industrial partners, and that's what's going to facilitate the financing.
Thank you. It's clear. Daniel?
Yeah, I don't. I didn't say that the combination of smaller biotech companies has to be done through the vehicle of SPAC, because actually SPAC is acquiring a single company, not multiple. But really the question is the following. On the one hand, there has never been as much capital for biotech as there has been in the last few years. The amount of capital invested in single companies, not just in the US, but even
recently in Europe, is very substantial. It used to be that Series A were 10 million euros or dollars. Now they're 100 million and more in some cases. So I think that's a very positive development for biotech and for the management of entrepreneurial biotech. On the other hand, the public biotech market has been down substantially, more than 50%, maybe 70% in the last 6 months. So the question is, are we in a durable, bear market, or is that just, temporary? Clearly in the short term, whether it's SPAC or crossover investment, and even with fundamental biotech investors, everybody is scared of what's going to happen tomorrow. So there are much, fewer transactions. I don't think that's going to last, for forever, but in the short term, it's problematic. At the end of the day, the question is the private markets better for a young biotech company, or is the public market, despite all of its challenges, more desirable? I think the answer is probably it depends how you execute. But if you're really looking in the private market, only those companies that have been able to raise very large amounts of money, often in the hundreds of millions, are able to survive. And I meet every week tons of companies that
have excellent management, excellent technology, low, private valuation. They may have 1, 2, or 3 fundamental investors. They go nowhere, and they're talking about discussion with the boards and their investors of whether they can extend by 1 quarter or 2 quarter. And we know that's not appropriate for smooth development of novel drugs. So, my bias would be to say that everything else being equal, if you can manage to be a public company, and there's still a very significant differential between US valuation and European valuation, you have much better chance not only of surviving, but also of thriving. That being said, I think that, putting a lot of resources in business development is critical. So we know now that, big pharma has a lot of resources in business development to compensate, for the challenges of internal innovation, but I'm not sure that, biotech boards and management are allocating enough resources to business development so that you can raise non-dilutive capital, and that complements what you can get from private investors or public investors.
Daniel, I think that the point you make is clearly funding of the project going forward, maybe through private, public, or partnerships. And the strategy for the company may be very well served by a fully supported, aggressive development plan that results in all the key milestones for value, including those that are important for commercialization and reimbursement, which may be, even if working on your own, might be a bit difficult. So with this, clearly, one of the aspects that we hear about that is a driver are discussions of pricing and reimbursement. We hear that, of course, if the pricing goes down, there might be less cash available for innovation and partnering. Michael, what is the pricing situation, particularly in the US? As what are the trends? What's the status, and where do you think we're going, and how will that affect our deal making?
Yeah, no, sure. Happy to answer that. And I do want to come back to a comment that Daniel made. I do agree that, small biotech absolutely need to invest time, energy, efforts, capital into business development. Although I do see many, many times on the sell side, small biotech invest way too much money in BD. These small biotechs have chief business officers, they have associate, directors of BD, and these companies are 30 people and they have teams of 5 BD people. So, half the time I'm asking myself, what are they doing on a day-to-day basis, right? I mean, you can only talk to Matthias and Katja so many times before their email gets, ignored. So I do agree that business development needs to be heavily invested in, but I would rather maybe have a CBO, a VP of BD, and that other team of 3 to 4 take that money and go solidify your patent estate, go run another mechanism study, go run another in vivo study, because that's what's going to get Merck, MSD excited and able to do a deal versus, having a BD team. That's just my take. As it pertains to pricing in the US, yes, it's an issue. Obviously, with the approval of Aduhelm in the CNS and the Alzheimer's space, Biogen poked the bear there, and everybody is freaking out. Pricing reform is coming to the US, whether we like it or not. And again, I think when you look at the way deals are being structured now, this idea of, okay, we're going to structure a milestone payment upon what your reimbursement is, that's kind of the first step that we're starting to see. Reform is coming, and we're seeing it, asked more and more earlier and earlier in deal discussions. Do you have any feedback from payers? Even on preclinical assets, we get asked that.
Thanks, Michael. Now, is that the same experience, Daniel, Aram, for you?
First, I'd like to respond to Michael. I think it depends, very much the BD, what your pipeline looks like. If you have one or several, platform technologies and that you can cost effectively, generate, data, then I think the investment in BD is very different than if you have a single molecule, moving forward. So, I mean, the bet that we've made at Cytovia is actually to have a combination of our own candidates that we're taking to the clinic, and two, major, platforms that are sufficiently disruptive that they're of interest to multiple companies. So I think it's the balance, and it depends on the situation. I agree that drug pricing reform is coming. The question is when. The political landscape in Congress and Senate, in the U.S. is not very supportive of changes in drug pricing. So it will come, but I don't see it, coming necessarily, as quickly as people have been saying.
Yeah, I think we haven't gotten so many questions about the pricing and reimbursement. I think, and part of this is perhaps the indications we're in, where it's fairly clear what you need to achieve in terms of endpoints and which ones are not acceptable for good pricing and reimbursement. So there's less uncertainty than, for example, in Alzheimer's, where you have perhaps a small improvement, and then everybody's debating about how clinically meaningful it is and how real it is and so on. So I think that's our point of view. And I think the other thing I'll say is that being on the board of a company that's much closer to marketing, a lot of the biotechs that are smaller perhaps underestimate the time and effort needed to prepare for commercial launch, whether or not the biotech is actually going to be doing it, because you need that information to discuss with pharma partners. They're going to want to know, what discussions you have had as you're getting, within a few years to market with these various clinicians, KOLs, payers, et cetera. And that's a lot of work.
That is really critical. So that there must be a balance between how much effort and time is developed to really creating that clinical development plan, defining the endpoints and the indications, where there will be very clear benefits to a patient population that will be reimbursed, because that basically, if you're first in class in a specific indication where there is no alternative, reimbursement is very likely to occur. If you go for something that slightly improves a certain outcome that is unclear, as you mentioned in the Alzheimer's space, it is much more challenging. Now, I'd like to hear maybe from the MSD perspective and our perspective, in a sense, what do you expect? A biotech company comes with a preclinical asset. How much pricing and reimbursement strategy would you like to have?
I think for us, it's reimbursement, as has been said before by others, is an important part of our kind of deal model, if you like. That it's not just about approvals, but also reimbursement. In oncology, the way we think about it is that even though a program may be early in preclinical stage, for example, we like to really have a clear understanding of what I would call the patient responder hypothesis, which is going to be important, of course, for reimbursement, which is basically, have you, through your mechanism of action, have you can you identify the patients who you think are going to respond to this treatment? And, what is the hypothesis behind that? What data do you have to back that up? So that's something we do look at early on and to guide, clinical development, clinical positioning, and all of this, leading to, of course, pricing and reimbursement. So that's the way we think about it. And I think that's, something else that was talked about in terms of biotechs having, of course, access to a lot more funding now than in previous, in recent years compared to previously. I think that there is still a strong, the feedback we get is that there is still a strong wish to partner because of the kind of, resources and know-how and expertise in how to go through that difficult, kind of expertise and challenges of a development plan. So I think despite the funding resources, I think biotech are still looking to partner. Also, it's not just about non-dilutive funding, it's about, developing a product in the right way with the right partner.
The right partner can provide a service actually to the biotech company that a public market cannot, or that even a VC cannot. It is really the ability to sit together and drive an asset to market in a way that no single partner can do.
Exactly.
And so I think that is a very powerful value proposition, because it creates the possibility of funding, which is good. But we heard there are many sources of funding, but really the ability to partner and move the asset forward in the most efficient way, in a very broad way, is important. And that's something that I hear from the partnership is something that could bring a lot of value that is independent of the cash that goes in. The cash will go in to drive the project to milestones. So the deal needs to have the right structure to enable all that value to be liberated, if you want, by the partners. Right, Matthias?
Yeah, I fully agree with what Khatereh said. I just want to stress one point. I think the competitive positioning of the asset, that's really the key that we're looking at. And really to just speak it out, I mean, we of course look at the landscape, the competition, especially also from a market access. And we have not talked about market access so much here, right? But that is also, as we all know, a topic on its own, and the pricing perspective. Yeah? And then we try to derive from that understanding of the landscape, really the target product profile for even a preclinical compound, so that you have a clear kind of, wish list, let's call it like that here, in benign terms, to say, these are the things that the asset needs, these are the boxes the asset needs to tick in terms of characteristics, in terms of profile, etc., pp, to really, really be successful, and then ultimately have a competitive positioning in a market environment, and then also live up to, let's say, a certain pricing potential. Right. And I mean, why is that important? At the end, it's important because we're only focusing our discussions on the pricing on the US mainly now here, but it's a global phenomenon, right? I mean, we have volume-based pricing in China. We may see also other instruments that market may introduce in the midterm. We have the US pricing reform we talked about. We have same discussions popping up in Germany and in Europe as such. And at the end of the day, I think we as an industry need to ask ourselves the question, how do we at the end, I mean, how can we all together sustain healthy margins, which we are all enjoying, right? And I'm saying this again because one thing is to get pressure from the kind of, let's say, regulatory pricing side. The other is kind of to get pressure really from the cost side. And look at it, development costs are increasing, right? The commercial opportunities are shrinking by and large. We talked about combinations and these kind of things, What it also means on the negative side of things, again, it's great for patients, but for a pure business situation is that it shortens your life cycles. And at the end of the day, last but not least, especially in oncology, the success rate of drugs that we develop is also going down, right? So I think we all collectively need to ask ourselves the question, how do we want to finance the next wave of innovation? It's not a problem, let's be very, very clear, that we have today. But with all of these trends continuing that direction, right, you will have increasing pressure on the margin. And then the question is, right, what's the risk appetite that the biotech has to go into indications that maybe not directly in the mainstream of the super highest interest of pharma with the biggest commercial opportunity, right? And also from the pharma side, what is the appetite to buy a really quote unquote niche indication, or to buy yourself into niche indications to really position a player there where maybe even, depending on where you look at, the need from the patients is even greater than in the main indications that are already catered with modern innovation. I think that's a thought that we should really keep a little bit in the back of our mind, because for me personally, it all goes back to that ecosystem thinking. I mean, yes, transaction business is about cash and the financial component for sure, right? But I guess none of us, and in general, the vast majority in the industry would have this job if it were just for the money. It's really about the patients at the end of the day, and having this kind of integrated ecosystem thinking to enable the next wave of innovation.
Yeah, Matthias, you mentioned the ecosystem. Should we explore that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, from our perspective, we have started to really rethink a little bit our model, how we do R&D, and we really think about it as a kind of open architecture R&D frame. Yeah, where we want to go much earlier into partnering with people. That doesn't necessarily mean to out-license assets or to license assets in, but it just really means to bring the right critical expertise together. Because I think the older big pharma model was for a long time to kind of, let's say, try to build all expertises in-house. And I still think, right, for the majority of let's say, functions, it is absolutely critical that you have an own understanding of what it takes to be successful in that aspect. Aram was already mentioning CMC, so manufacturing earlier, right? That's a core expertise of how that needs to be there. But at the end of the day, right, when we come to a conclusion that maybe an asset is better positioned in somebody else's hand, then we let it go. And we really moved, and we did a couple of deals in that regard also over the last time, including a SPAC transaction actually, yeah, where we're generating companies together with investors and biotechs really to put 1 or 2 or 3 assets into these companies to then really allow them to be developed in maybe a more efficient, not only from a cost capital, but also from a time aspect manner than we could do it. It's not because of our inability, but maybe the focus that we're having at a given point in time is just different. And that is why I'm really a big proponent of that ecosystem thinking.
Thanks, Matthias. So this really takes us to the point where we can wrap up on a number of the important topics that were discussed today. It's clear that the patent expiry of some of the checkpoint inhibitors is not a cliff as steep as could be seen yet. Aspects and all the players in the field to really partner together and move the assets forward. It's important to consider that, yes, the model may be changing early partnering, but that available partnering might change, that pricing and reimbursement is an important driver, but not the only driver. And yet there is the real opportunity for all the players in the field to move projects forward. With the insights that have been provided by the panelists, it remains for me to thank my co-chair, Matthias, and certainly all the panelists today for their insights, their candid advice, and their presence at the panel today. So thank you very much for your participation, and I wish you a very successful conference.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.